Welcome to this episode of Cloudbusting. We're going to be continuing with our trends episode. So we're looking at trends around cloud for 2021. We've covered a couple of trends already, and we're into our next trend, which is next level robustness. Now, what do we mean by next level robustness? Well, let's give an example. So throughout the pandemic that we've just had, there's been a huge amount of reliance on consumer digital. So, ordering food at home, ordering goods at home, and really that infrastructure that's needed to support that consumer digital has become absolutely critical. If this pandemic had happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that infrastructure would not have been there to support a lot of the requirements that are needed by people who are all now working from home, sitting in their homes. And I think as we go forward, we're going to be seeing more and more reliance on that. So to discuss this topic, we're absolutely delighted to be joined by Nikki Baird. Nikki is the Vice President of Retail Innovation at Aptos Retail. Hi, Nikki. Lovely to have you on the pod. Do you want to just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Aptos Retail?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I look after the future at Aptos, which is always fun to say. I really look after the trends that impact retailers and translate that for our customers and then also for our solutions. And Aptos is an enterprise solution provider that's focused on the retail industry. We play in the commerce space as well as in supply chain and inventory management.
And are you B2C or B2B?
So we sell to the retailers who then implement our solutions to interact with consumers.
And who are sort of some of your customers that people may have heard of then?
Oh my gosh. Let's see. Of course you asked that and I have no customers in my head. Let's see. In the UK, we have several customers. We have WH Smith. When you are ringing up in one of the travel stores, you are doing that on Aptos point of sale software. Let's see who else comes to mind that I won't get in trouble for saying. Let's see. Adidas uses us for planning solutions. We have Urban Outfitters in the US for planning solutions as well. And then for commerce, we have Vitamin Shop and The Buckle and Cole Haan. So we have a lot of brands, fashion brands, and then also, kind of general retailers. Ross Stores is another customer that uses our commerce solutions.
Cool. So some very well-known brands, and so hopefully you know what you're talking about.
Yes, hopefully.
Brilliant. Well, lovely to have you on the show. We're also joined by Dan, producer man. How are you, mate?
I am very well, thank you very much, Jez. As you know, we're recording this podcast in the evening on a Tuesday evening, and I've got to say it's suddenly spring. I can see the sort of hints of spring coming along here in London, and a bit of hope coming. Lockdown's going to end soon. We might even be able to get to the pub at some point this year, gents.
I hear, yeah. Our editor sent us I think it was you, sent us a website that's got a countdown for all the different, when lockdown unlocks, as to when we can actually let's get a beer outside. So it was quite exciting. Dave's also with us. Hey, mate, how are you? All good?
Not bad, mate. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I am glad that spring is springing, as Dan has said. It's nice to see that it's light at 5:20 in the evening. I mean, it's been pretty hardcore with the dark evenings and
the last couple of months have been a proper hibernation period, haven't they? I think I've had more early nights in the last 8 weeks than I've had in probably the 8 years before that. It's like, might as well just go to bed.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it's all good. I think there's definitely a positive vibe coming. So let's get into critical infrastructure, next level robustness. Dave, Nikki, over to you guys.
Thanks, mate. Hi, Nikki. Nice to see you. Thanks again for coming on today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So the context of this is, again, part of our Trends 2021 series. We are now on Trend 3. The trends before this were cloud eras, talking about how cloud adoption is accelerating and modernization is accelerating. Trend 2 was about new forms of continuity-driven transformation. So organizations thinking about using things like the cloud and transformational pieces of work to actually allow them to operate no matter what goes on in the physical environment. And trend 3, which is, as Jez was saying, is like next generation robustness and next level robustness. And what that came from was an observation that we made that consumer digital, and by that I'm talking predominantly about things like home grocery shopping or things that you were using online services for that perhaps you did previously as a luxury or you did it as a convenience previously. And that during a lockdown situation, not only from a point of view of the consumer, was that moved from being a category of a luxury into being really very critical. I remember in lockdown 1 in the UK, getting a slot for a home delivery on a grocery home service website like an Ocado was very difficult. And they responded very well and very professionally, but there was clearly capacity and bandwidth issues there. So there's something about, as a consumer, how the nature of that changed in certain situations that were probably, practically unpredictable. And then not only that, but the result of the fact that those services were there really helped governments and states in the US, I'm guessing, respond to this thing where previously, if people hadn't been able to get to shops because of being in a full lockdown, and shops would have been even more overwhelmed, having to put in things like COVID measures and having to do that. And as a result of putting in COVID measures, you had reduced people being able to get into shops. And there's no doubt that digital services took a lot of stress out of that situation. So I guess let's start, Nikki, with what are your general observations of digital services during the pandemic and particularly lockdown? And did you see these sorts of trends in the work that you were doing?
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely saw where the shutdowns dropped store volumes to absolute zero. Zero sales reported, zero activity happening in stores. And then online e-commerce fulfillment went through the roof. It became a really interesting problem, though, very quickly because of the constraints in the warehouses that you could operate. So you had space constraints where you couldn't run a full crew. And then you had, within about 3 or 4 weeks of those shutdowns, then those warehouses were running out of inventory because they were not stocked to really provide that level of service sustained at that amount of time,
right,
for that demand. And so one of the places where it got very interesting was for those retailers who could direct to store those orders. And you can put one person in a store, 1 or 2 people in a store safely and have them go pick that inventory and fulfill those orders. That really made a difference. It really was the difference between selling nothing at all because you ran out of inventory in your warehouses or being able to continue to trade and continue to support customers even without them being able to set foot in the store.
Right. So what do you think in terms then of going forward? Has the e-commerce world begun to start to think about things in a different way? And by that, I'm thinking about stuff like building in more capacity, trying to remove even more physicality from the supply chains that they've got right now. I'm sure when you looked at the capacity of an online trader like a Walmart in the US or like a Tesco in the UK, they had plenty of capacity, but under that level of strain, we're struggling to scale. So is the industry at the moment thinking about going forward how they're building these kind of super scaling events?
Yeah, and I think there's 2 parts to that, right? Because there is the cloud infrastructure piece of it. If you had done that well, then you're auto scaling on the e-commerce side, right? All the people coming to your site's not crashing.
Yep.
But as you pointed out, you're running into a brick wall of where that digital meets physical very fast because you've got to have people who pick this inventory. You've got to have the physical capacity to deliver that ultimately to a consumer. And we just sort of rather than having the constraint at the very front end of that customer interaction when they tried to go to the site to buy something, it came along at the tail end of that purchase process when they tried to schedule the delivery or tried to schedule that pickup. And it's like we've just taken an unprecedented amount of demand and funneled it through a channel that was a minority percentage of the business. And in grocery, it was an extreme minority of the business, right? I mean, for your average grocer, it was like 3 or 5% of the business max. And now we're talking about 30%. I've heard numbers that said we saw 10 years of e-commerce growth in 6 months.
Right.
There's no way to plan for that. And I think that also it is a big question. Retailers are a thin margin business, so they can't keep a lot of capacity laying around. They just can't afford that. So it is going to be a really important question for them on how to refine this going forward. Where do the scales balance out between online and a primarily digital interaction versus a store interaction? How do I balance my capacity so that I anticipate where that falls out once consumers can go back to stores? I think the conclusion today is that we're at an extreme. Like, we're at this extreme because we have to be, that it's going to come back off that extreme. How much? That's the hard question to answer.
I was actually going to go there next. It's a brilliant bridge into what are you seeing in the next 18 months, both in terms of the habit aspect of it, in terms of some customers springing back and some just staying with where they are right now. And also what's the conversation going on in the industry about preparing for potential future analogous continuity events. And what's driving that is that almost every business in the world will have had pandemic on their business continuity lists at some point and will have gone through like some form of desk-based exercise. But I don't think any of them came anywhere close to the sort of scale we've had to deal with. So how has that conversation changed?
Yeah, I would agree. So you asked a lot of questions in there.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's
so
all
we've
right.
got half an hour. We've got half an hour. We've got to get it all in.
The answer's yes.
Yeah. So I would say what we're seeing in the next 18 months. So retailers are trying as much as possible to hedge their bets. So they want consumers to come back to stores. They have an economic model that is built off of stores being a substantial part of their business. And the pandemic has not, as much as it's gone on long enough to change consumer behavior, it has not gone on long enough to change retailer infrastructure and the cost of that infrastructure.
But interesting. Do you think there's anyone that's going to take a punt and say, actually, no, we're going to stop brick and mortar? I guess they own and they got long leases or whatever at the moment. And as you say, it's very difficult to change like this. But
yeah. Well, Godiva is an interesting example of a retailer who just closed all of their retail stores. But their store strategy was also interesting in that they were mostly in malls. It was a taste and try experience, which in COVID, what are you going to do? You can't really, incent that. No. And they were even producing some food in those stores. So like if you wanted chocolate covered strawberries or things like that, all of that had to be completely reconsidered. So, and in one sense, they're an extreme because it's not like every retailer has those kinds of situations that they're dealing with 100% of the time. Or they could be viewed as kind of the canary in the coal mine, the first symptom of what could be a larger problem for retailers. But I think the part of what makes it complex to decompose there is the mall part of it, and just the fact that nobody wants to go to a mall, even if you can. And then the tasting, the experiential part of it as well. That I don't know when that's going to be able to come back, not because it's not safe, but because consumer perception of those activities is that it's not safe.
Right.
So that was part one of your question.
You're doing well so far.
Good. So let's see. Then the second half of that was kind of more around the criticality part of it and the just the planning for future events or things like that are that disruptive.
Exactly, and how you trade that off against normal trading, I suppose, is in
Yeah.
there, and how you balance and how you manage that capacity issue and the
Yeah.
physicality issue.
Yeah, and I think there's an example in retail that probably falls into the, okay, we learned how to do it, but we're going to pack it away, and then if we need it again, we can roll it out, and that would be curbside pickup. So curbside pickup in some locations works really well, but if you're on a busy street, and I don't know how it is for you, but I know like Main Street or High Street parking is complete premium, right? Nobody's going to support a retailer who has a storefront on a high street carving out a couple parking spaces so that they can have curbside pickup there, right? That's a non-starter for most cities. But when nobody's on those streets, then curbside pickup is fine, right? And that was sort of a pandemic thing that you could get away with it because nobody's supposed to really be out anyway. So, you can take up the space to have that kind of curbside experience. Malls did the same thing, right? Some malls set up like joint curbside operations so that you could order from a mall store and then you could drive up to an entrance of the mall and have them actually take it out to you. So you didn't have to go in to get the products. But, is that going to stick around once consumers come in a mall? A mall is designed for people to go inside. They're doing that.
Social space, isn't it?
They did it because they had to. They're not gonna continue to do that. But now that we know how, would it take as long to set up a curbside operation if we had to close things down because of an infectious disease or pandemic or something like that? I think that's the kind of thing where the contingency planning works. You could roll those processes out again now that you know how to do them. But is curbside pickup going to become something that is an essential part of every retail interaction? No. Maybe at your grocery store still, where you can have that drive up and they can put things in your car. But for a high street retailer, not a chance. There's just nobody will be willing to support that going forward.
Right. And what are you seeing in the supply chains? Because it seemed to me that the private sector played such a huge part in the COVID response, which to a certain extent is to be expected, but it took a huge amount of pressure off governments. And I wonder if that was a discussion at any point, and the role that the private sector played here. Because in the UK, for example, there was already a little bit of things like food banks and things like that happening for folks that were, that didn't have access to some of these services. So, if you extrapolate on from that, you would have imagined a bigger governmental response would have been required. And the private sector base sort of sucked that up, right, as a result of digital and some of these continuity measures.
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't see that going away just because I see consumer pressure for retailers to be, upstanding citizens and contribute to society, right? There's that expectation from consumers that you as a business are going to use some of your power for good. So for grocery, it's food banks, it's expiring inventory and making that available before it goes bad, and reducing your food waste at the same time, right? There's lots of aspects of that. It's companies like LVMH who turned over some of their perfume factories to manufacturing hand sanitizer, and fashion retailers who turned their production capacity to making masks, right? All of those things are things that I think consumers will still expect brands to deliver as part of their brand promise and just being good participants of the world. And I think that does take some of the pressure off. It makes it harder to make sure that all of those efforts are directed to where they do the most good. Like, I wouldn't want to take out the role that government can play and should play in directing some of those activities, but I don't see private enterprise reducing their role going forward by any means.
Yeah. So let's gaze forward a little bit then and talk about what kind of digital strategy retailers are putting in place going forward, and whether those things have been in any way impacted by what we've seen over the course of the last 12 months or so.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, shoring up their digital and their omni-channel operations, so where they can support that buy online, pick up in store, or ship from store kinds of capabilities. and delivery as well. I think, they made a lot of investments during the pandemic, but those were shoestring operations. Those were just get it done quick.
Right.
Support the scale that we see right now, but we have no idea what we're going to do with this going forward. So we do see a lot of activity now where they're kind of shoring all of that up. I think on the supply chain side, it's interesting because the reaction was to simplify assortments. So, in effect, retailers have taken an approach of reducing their risk and exposure of making a poor choice because demand is so uncertain that you don't want to miss it. They would rather miss under and not sell as much as they could have than buy too much and have too much inventory sitting around. And during hard times, so during the Great Recession, the economic slowdown of 2008 and 2009, retailers did a lot of the same things. And then, the temptation is, I don't want to leave any money on the table. I'll take some of that markdown risk. I might get stuck with some inventory. I don't see them having the discipline to stick with some of those things, even with as hard of a bite that the pandemic had, because it hit everybody equally. It wasn't like you made bad choices. It was like everybody is stuck in the same boat.
I mean, it must have, for the sector, it must have fundamentally changed the nature and the scale of some of the continuity planning.
Yeah, I talked to one retailer who sells items that run, $10, $15 average price. And they went through the ship from store exercise to say, is there a business case here? And they said, no. They said, our items are heavy and they're cheap. So by the time we pick that item, pack it in a box and ship it, we've pretty much given away all of our margin. We don't want to do it. Well, March of last year hit and they were like, full steam ahead, ship from store. Who cares about the business case?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Like for a lot of organizations, we talk a bit about how the whole work from home thing, the culture around working from home has changed. The ability for organizations to look at that and go, God, we achieved that in like 48 hours. We could completely pivot our organization in 40 hours. And before, they probably wouldn't have been able to do it in 48 months. So you can see the fact that this event has been a huge catalyzer for change, hasn't it?
It has. I mean, honestly, I've sat through in my career in retail technology, I've sat through selection processes, right? That took years, 2 years to choose some software, let alone implement it, right? And that one retailer that I was talking about, we had been talking to them about order management software forever. And, and then it was like, turn that use case on right now. Like, I'll just sign, whatever. Let's just get this going. We have to be able to sell the inventory that's in our stores. And they discovered that actually they could make it affordable. So their business case that they had done, all that analysis that they had done ahead of time was wrong. And this is where that critical infrastructure piece and the digital infrastructure piece becomes interesting, because if you can just turn it on and try it, then that can really change how you approach making these decisions. You can be much faster and you can have a better idea of where those benefits are. All those business case exercises are just that, they're exercises. They have no touchstone to reality, because you don't know what's going to happen until you really turn it on. And especially when you're talking about consumers using it, you never know what consumers are going to do.
I mean, it's the beauty of cloud, right? Cloud and SaaS, you can turn it on, experiment, scale, fail fast, succeed quickly. I always like to put that in. And if you do, it doesn't cost you the earth, right? There isn't huge capital investment. You don't have, you're not got something you've got to depreciate off the books for the next 4 or 5 years. And obviously, I think a lot of organizations took full advantage of that. And the ones that weren't quite ready or were still insisting on having everything in their data centers, I think got a little bit left behind.
Yeah, I would agree. Like the pace of change was so fast, even for, point of sale solutions. So the software that's running that cash register, that in some organizations that software is old enough to vote and drink, and it's because it is so painful to change it. But when you need to add pickup in store as an option and you can't because that teenager still living in your basement is not cooperating with you, then it changes your thinking about how painful is this really to change this.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a good point. We talk about experimentation and sort of setting up technology that is adaptable, particularly at the channel end. So you can, exactly to your point, you can add new bits of it without spending a lot of money. Test whether your market likes it or not. If it does, fantastic, scale it out. If it doesn't, just quietly retire it. And you can do that like on an ongoing iterative basis. So do you think like as a working method within, I mean, obviously it's pioneered by, I guess, the likes of Amazon.com and a lot of the early and very innovative e-tailers. But do you now see a COVID effect pushing that behavior into more traditional businesses?
Yeah, I do. And I think they felt the pain of not being able to change fast enough. And even for those businesses to see how quickly they could adapt their online business, right? Their digital channels, they didn't have those constraints. And we definitely see kind of a reckoning on the part of retailers with traditional brick and mortar operations where they're saying, I need that speed and I need that flexibility in my stores too. That's still, I mean, it's still going to be the bulk of where retail happens. Even with all of the pressure on e-commerce, I think once stores open up, people will come back, not to the degree that they were before, but they're still going to come back. It's still going to be the bulk of retail transactions. And yeah, it's very difficult to kind of implement that in stores.
So do you think the consumer habit might change though? So yeah, the stores may open up and I may go to the mall, but actually what I might do is more the click and collect type. I know what I want. I'm it's nice to browse and try things on and stuff. And that, I guess that will happen. But things like, the traditional, I don't know, supermarket shop, might that still be that more that I don't know. I mean, I'm certainly seeing it in the hospitality space. This element of queuing at a bar, I think, will disappear, and you'll be much more. I'm going to sit at a table and I'm going to use an app to order and that sort of thing. Do you think that happened in retail?
I mean, if the pandemic had been a 3-month affair, I would be less confident that consumer behavior would change. But the fact that we're coming on to a year and we've still got some months ahead of us before we can really say that this is over, the longer it goes on, the more those habits become cemented in consumer expectations, I think. I will say, though, even my personal grocery experience, right? In the early days, I was ordering from Walmart. I was having it delivered to my house. We tried the curbside as well, but we stopped, not just because, we kind of came to the conclusion that you could safely manage a grocery store trip, but because I was tired of rotten oranges and apples with bruises in them.
Food pretty close to its sell-by date. Yeah.
So, there's definitely we still have to acknowledge that the digital experience is not perfect. There's definitely still room for improvement there. And I think there's things that people put up with because you just can't go to the store or you are not in a position yourself where you feel like that's safe, that, when that restriction is lifted, people will go back to stores and forget about the rest.
Maybe to bring us to a conclusion, then, maybe let's just stare ahead a little bit and think about what that in-store experience might look like, just for the fun of it and the bringing together of the digital aspects of the experience and the in-store sort of more satisfying aspects of the experience. And Jez was talking before we started recording today about things like Amazon Go. I know that, one of my personal habit changes that's happened over the last 12 months is I buy everything on my phone now. So I use the what's it called? The Apple Pay thing.
Oh yes.
And I literally use it for everything because it's got a much higher limit or no limit. So you're not stuck with the contactless £30 in the UK or something like that. So I've completely got into that habit. I don't see that changing anytime soon. So I wonder what other little things like that are going to pervade, and whether that's going to accelerate our move towards something like an Amazon Go, where the integration of the physical experience and the digital experience is at the forefront.
Just for anyone who might not know what Amazon Go is, this is essentially where you walk into the store, you have your app. Around the store, it's got loads of cameras and it's tracking you as you pick your stuff off the shelf, and you put it in your bag. You walk out of the store, there's no going to a till. It knows what you've bought. It charges your Amazon account and you're done. We had a little go. There was a trial store in Seattle a couple of years ago, and brilliant experience, really good. But there's no interpersonal interaction. And I wonder whether, I think some retailers still want their customers to have that. I think some customers actually don't want it. So interesting.
Yeah, I think there's a couple aspects. There's the cashless part of it and the contactless payment part of it for sure. I think that is going to stay. I think, outside of Asia, where mobile orientation has been much higher anyway, and some of the contactless payment there just has been ingrained for much longer. I think, Europe and Americas, we've caught up because of the pandemic. And I don't see people, giving that back in any way, shape, or form. Like I've last touched cash, a year ago. Right.
Yeah, I literally still have the couple of 20 quid notes that I had in my wallet from March last year. It's absolutely bizarre.
Exactly.
And it feels like you're holding like an ancient document.
Yes, exactly. I don't see us going back to, loving cash from that perspective. And so the Amazon Go experience, I think, is good at like pushing the envelope from that perspective. Did you try to buy alcohol in that Seattle store?
No. I think I can't remember what I bought. We just bought one item just to test it.
Is it set off the sprinkler system and klaxons?
Yeah. It has in that Seattle store in particular, and maybe this is getting into American liquor laws more than we need to, but they had it cordoned off, and you had to actually show. They had a person who was like a guard into that section,
right.
And you had to show your driver's license or proof of age in order to get into that section, because the system that they were using is not smart enough to integrate that aspect of your identification into the purchase. And the only way they could do that was with a person. So there's definitely some limits in what you can do with Amazon Go. The other aspect, to flip it completely on its head, so, a lot of retailers invested in live streaming. So they would have a store associate in a store broadcasting on an Instagram or a YouTube channel and selling products, like actually like, here's the jacket, here's how it looks, and selling it in that way. And I think one thing that will be interesting to consider will be how to have these hybrid sort of physical, how do I address the customer that's in the store, but how do I also address an audience or shoppers who are at home, but in my store, right? Connecting with that store associate and accommodating both of those experiences under the same roof. I think that's a really interesting challenge as well. How do you bring those online shoppers into a store experience, even if they're not in the store?
Well, I think on that big question, it's a good place to end, and a good examination for me of like not only some of the physical robustness and scaling issues that we were originally pointing out in the trend, but actually a number of other dimensions that need to be factored into digital strategies in that sector going forward.
Oh, Nikki, actually, just before we finish, there was one question I wanted to ask. Obviously, one of the big cloud service providers is AWS, Amazon Web Services. One of the huge online retailers is Amazon. Are you seeing that supermarkets, retailers, the brick and mortar retailers that are moving to digital, is there a sort of a bit of a conflict of interest in terms of using AWS for their infrastructure? It's almost like funding the competition.
Yeah, I would say in the grocery space, definitely, they still very much care about that. With all the inroads that Amazon has made around grocery, AWS is still like, don't even talk to me about it. I don't want any of that in my enterprise. I will say though that a lot of retailers who outside of grocery who had taken that position have kind of come off of it, and in some ways, it's just sort of throwing up your hands. It's like the futility of trying to keep AWS out of their operations. If they contract with some provider and that provider is using some third party and that's on AWS, it's like you don't even know, and yet it somehow ends up in your enterprise anyway. Yeah. It's sort of like I give up. If you want to run on AWS, fine. I don't care anymore.
And of course, other cloud service providers are available.
Absolutely, and quite willing to attempt to be competitive in any way, shape, or form. So it does make for interesting conversations on the cloud platform side.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nikki. That was great. Really interesting conversation, and looking forward to seeing what's going to be happening in the future of retail. Hopefully not another pandemic. So that takes us on to our 10-second recommendations, the TSRs, where we like to just recommend something to the audience that they can perhaps experience a little bit outside of work, maybe something in lockdown. Dan, producer man, let's start with you. What have you got for us?
Well, as you know, Jez, I am on the pulse of technology and apps, being of my generation and whatnot. I'm going to recommend Pinterest this time here. And there is a reason behind this.
Is that still up? I thought that went down about a year ago.
At least you got something in this century.
The method to my madness is that I am currently going through the process of moving in with my girlfriend, and she's decided to set up a Pinterest board for all of our home decor ideas. Mood board, yeah. And actually, it's basically a really interesting passive aggressive way of her telling me that my stuff is stupid, and it won't be coming in there. So it's settled some potential arguments, but it's also sort of really helped plan that. So yeah, at the moment I'm into Pinterest, and also saying goodbye to some of my old band posters that I've had on my wall for the last 10 years.
You're gonna have to take that Linda Lizardi poster down, Dan.
It'd have to happen eventually.
That is an absolutely ancient reference. Oh my god!
Well, I just thought it's about as up to date as Pinterest.
What have you got for us, Jez?
I've just watched a TV show that I thought was brilliant. 000. I think it's on Amazon in the US. I think it's on Sky in the UK. It's a drug smuggling story, but done, a little bit different from, there's a lot of them out there, like Narcos, etc. But this is done in a totally different way. You've got the sort of the buyers in Italy, the sellers in Mexico, and you've got a brokerage company out of the US. And it's just a really good story. And each episode goes into a part of the story, and they do it in a couple of different time frames, so you see each person's side of the story from it. Really good, great story, very entertaining. Highly recommend it.
How many episodes have you seen?
There's 8, and I've seen 7. So I haven't quite seen the finale, which for me, I'm not recommending it after the first episode.
It could go either way for me, though.
Could go either. It could be a terrible ending, but I don't think so. Nikki, what have you got for us?
So I was going to go with a drink. I know Stanley Tucci made the Negroni quite famous during lockdown, and I
love a Negroni.
I acquired a bottle of Campari, and you really can only drink so many Negronis.
It's very sweet, isn't it? It puts a fur on your teeth.
That sharp taste at the end. So I looked around for some other recipes that you could use Campari in, and I discovered this Grand Boulevardier. So Boulevardier was originally a drink that was invented in France during the Prohibition era of the United States. A lot of famous bartenders went to Paris to ply their trade. And so it does use Campari, but I adapted it, and I'll explain how the Grand comes in. So it is a Grand Boulevardier. So the Boulevardier is 2 parts whiskey, 1 part Campari, 1 part third thing that I didn't like. So I didn't use it anymore. Right. And I replaced it with Grand Marnier. So 2 parts whiskey, 1 part Campari, 1 part Grand Marnier, or your choice of orange liqueur, shaken and then served over ice. It's very nice. Now it sneaks up on you, so don't drink it very fast. let the ice melt.
Nikki, one thing I will say is that every time a guest has recommended a cocktail on the podcast, Dave has then gone and made that the following Friday and given a review. So be prepared. There will probably be a review and probably a selfie of Dave about 3 or 4 of those deep on a Friday night.
I actually have all of those ingredients too, Nikki. So I will honor it. I'll honor the system.
I'm looking forward to it. I am very interested in the review. That is a drink of my own making, adapted, but my own making. So I would love to hear what you think.
Definitely give that a go.
Brilliant. Dave, what's yours?
A TV show this week for me too. And again, this is about as modern as Pinterest, this TV show. So, most people will have seen it. It's the Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Have you watched Brooklyn Nine-Nine?
Is that from 1999?
That is alarmingly mainstream. Alarmingly mainstream from you, Dave.
Is it mainstream? I honestly, I recognise I'm very late to this party.
It's a great show, mate.
It's really, really hilarious. Properly laugh out loud for a lot of the 20-minute duration of each episode. Yeah, love it. I have nothing more to say on it. I'm catching up. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks, everybody. Nikki, thanks ever so much for coming on. That was a really fascinating conversation. Really enjoyed it. And thank you for being a guest.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Dave, thanks, mate.
Thanks, Chef.
Thanks, Dan. Always good to have you producing. I think you produced well on this one.
Oh, producing the goods again, Jeff.
We are all on Twitter at Cloudbusting We're also all on LinkedIn. Please do feel free to connect to us. Nikki, you're happy for people to link into you. Nikki Baird, you'll find her.
Absolutely.
And we will talk to you all next time. Goodbye.